And thank you so much for agreeing to speak to us today.
Thanks, Charles. Good morning, everybody. I'm Libero Della Piana, and I'm really glad to be able to be with you this morning to kick things off and stimulate some discussion about organizing. But first, Alana just walked in. Charles was looking for you. Hello, wave, Alana. So I just want Charles, don't go away for a second. Charles and Alana have been really the throbbing heart of Organizing 2.0. This, I believe, is the 8th year of this conference, and it is amazing how much they've done with almost no money, with volunteer effort, a lot of hard work and gumption, and I really just want to thank them for their work. And this is my 5th time, but thanks everybody. And I think those of you who have tried to do trainings and education on technology and activism and nonprofits and unions know these things are insanely expensive. You go to these trainings and workshops, and Organizing 2.0 has always put an emphasis on being accessible, on being extremely low cost or no cost, of being something done for folks here in New York and around the region. So I just want to thank them again. And thank you all. I'm so impressed, so many first-timers here. So, as Charles said, my name is Libero Della Piana. I am the new digital director of something called People's Action, which is an exciting new organization that has been being built currently by 3 different organizing traditions. Alliance for a Just Society out of Seattle, which used to be the Northwest Federation of Community Organizations, National People's Action, out of Chicago, and U.S. Action out of Washington, D.C. And just this week, the new inaugural boards of People's Action and People's Action Institute, which is 501c3, came into existence. And it's a very exciting and a little bit terrifying, and it is in part an answer to this question of what's emerging, what's changing and organizing. So that's all I'll say on that. Do we have slides? Yes? So when Charles and Alana asked me to speak to this question of what's changing and organizing, I initially had sort of a cop-out answer, which is that nothing has changed and everything has changed. Organizing is as old as dirt, right? That as long as people have some need in their community and their lives, that they come together in order to fight and win. And at the same time, the world is changing immensely. And is the sound going in and out? The world is changing immensely, and organizing is changing with it, right? Organizing is committed to meeting people where they're at and then taking them somewhere. And in order to meet them where they're at, we have to stay current with how people engage, how people communicate, how people learn and grow. So organizing is changing, but it's also just a very ancient instinct. So what is organizing? Organizing is really the act, the practice, which tries to make real this concept that Wael Ghonim, who was a pivotal person in the Arab Spring in Egypt, this phrase he popularized: the power of the people is greater than the people in power. Well, that's true, but it's only true if you organize, right? It's a potential power. And that's really what organizing is about, is unleashing the potential power of the people. I come out of a tradition of organizing and training from the Center for Third World Organizing, C2. And the Center for Third World Organizing, based out in Oakland, California, we used to talk about the craft of organizing. That organizing is, contact work, outreach, base building. It's research, that we need to have knowledge from the community and knowledge about our world around us. that it's about action, all different kinds of direct action, moving people into action. It's about fundraising. It's about gathering resources from the community and elsewhere to do what you need to do. And it's about training and education. It's about leadership development. So years later, I still use this craft of organizing to think about what organizing is and the work that we do. And then I'm going to put a quote up from Mr. Alinsky. Tactics mean doing what you can with what you have. And I think this is an extremely important thing to remember. I don't always agree with Alinsky, but this is extremely important, especially when we talk about online organizing, new technology, et cetera. The point is that no matter what you have, you can put it into use. You don't need the newest, nicest technology. You don't need the most advanced kind of tools, but you use what you've got around you. And I think that that's extremely important. Someone else once told me, the only technology that matters in organizing is the technology that your people use. You know, if you're providing something that is not useful to people, that they have no engagement with, then it's not useful to use an organizer. So when we think about organizing, people say, well, you know, there's technology is emerging, it's changing organizing today. But think about the civil rights movement. Could the civil rights movement have been successful? Would the tactics and strategies have been different if there had not been television? When we think about Bloody Selma and Bloody Sunday in Selma, the crossing of the Edmund Pettus Bridge, what made that an impactful, powerful shift in the country, and in fact passed legislation, was the fact that it was televised. It changed the tactics, it changed what was possible. It meant that isolated incidents in the South that few people knew about suddenly became national and international news. So technology is always something that we utilize. So, what is changing today? So there are so many things emerging and organizing, changing today. I won't get into all of them, but I wanted to lift up a few things. There's some really exciting work happening in Indian country, around the country, around North America in terms of organizing. My partner, Judith LeBlanc, is the head of the Native Organizers Alliance, and they're doing a lot of work training organizers and linking up different movements in Indian country. And there's this weird contradiction that huge parts of Indian country have no access to broadband cable. They have little access to even cell phone because they're in rural areas that have been totally bypassed by telecom companies. And yet the most innovative, exciting work that's happening is deeply digital. You know, people used to talk about Black Twitter. Well, today there very much is native Facebook. And there's whole communities of exchange happening in Facebook. And because of the rural work, because of rural isolation, activists have taken to Twitter and Facebook and online tools. Pinterest has a huge Indian activist scene. And all these amazing efforts have exploded just in the past couple years. Apache Stronghold, which has been an ongoing occupation, a success. They won a big victory to fight against the Oak Flat conversion to private use and mining. The Idle No More, which started in Canada and became really a global indigenous movement through online tools. Not Your Mascot, and all kinds of other campaigns that have taken a long-standing movement against racist mascots and turned it into really a huge phenomenon that's amplified these movements way beyond their initial base. And you know, things like Cowboy Indian Alliance, which were able to go from online to offline and build a huge movement that marched to Washington that said that that ranchers and Indian people have a common agenda and a common interest in ending pipelines and resource extraction, and keep it in the ground, which was around the tar sands campaign. And there are many, many more. But all of this has really emerged in a huge way in Indian country in the past couple years. What else is new? You know, when we think about memes, you know, people always think about like cat videos or something, you know, but the original idea of a meme was an idea or an image that was a seed that was easily replicable, repeatable, right? It was mimetic, that people would take this and mimic it and spread it all over the place. And to me, what's exciting is that instead of it just being something that's cute, memes have actually changed the conversation, right? An idea, a phrase, a concept that captures the imagination. And the most powerful memes are the ones that aren't just created out of thin air and inserted into the culture, but they in fact reflect back at people what they already know. They give voice to people's experience. And it reminds me of this other great quote from another organizer, Fred Ross Sr., who said, "A good organizer is a social arsonist who goes around setting people on fire." And to me, that's what a powerful meme does. It's a spark. It sets people on fire. We are the 99%, right? OWS, its probably most lasting legacy was this concept. Black Lives Matter. You know, you think about this hashtag that was created in the wake of the murder of Trayvon Martin, didn't really catch on until almost 2 years later when Mike Brown is murdered. So timing matters because, again, the memes have to really capture the moment. And while police murder, the killing of young black boys and men, is as old, you know, it goes back as long as this country's history, people weren't quite ready, right? But by the time Mike Brown's death rolls around, Black Lives Matter is not just sort of this innovative phrase, it becomes the culmination of a cultural moment. And it changes forever the way we think about these issues. Feel the burn, right? Winnie Wong, who I think will be here later, you know, is credited with coining this phrase that didn't come from the campaign, but really captures the excitement and the spirit of Bernie Sanders' campaign. Idle No More is another one that, again, didn't begin online. Began in Canada, parliamentarian who stood up and said, you know, Indigenous people aren't going to stand for our conditions anymore, and swept through Indian country in North America, but also became symbolic of indigenous struggles all over the world. So a meme becomes more than a digital tool or a tactic as some way to get people to click something. A meme actually engages what some people call the third face of power, right? It's changing the conversation, it's changing the narrative, it's actually engaging in a bigger political struggle. So what else is new? How many folks have heard of this? How many folks have heard of canvassing? You know what canvassing is? Going door to door. You've probably been canvassed if you haven't done canvassing. Someone knocks on your door. They want to have a conversation with you about a candidate, about an issue. And those conversations traditionally coming out of political campaigns and grassroots organizing and labor, you know, they're fairly short conversations. The idea is that you're either fishing, right? What some organizers call fishing, right? You're trying to find out, is there a hot topic? Is there a hot leader? You're trying to identify the people who are already with you so that you can target them and come back to them, etc. Or you're pushing. You're saying, here's an issue your neighbor's interested in. Will you get on board? And the engagement is fairly quick because you don't, the logic is you don't want to waste your time, on doors where someone doesn't agree with you. Makes sense. You got a lot of doors. There's so many people out there. You just keep moving. But there's beginning to be a conversation about that model is problematic in a number of ways. Not that it is useless. It's still useful. But we can go deeper, deep canvassing. So I think about this quote from The Art of War, which is, if the enemy leaves the door open, you must rush in. And I think about this country and the fact that we have 350 million people in this country, and a very small percentage of them are engaged in public debate, engaged in politics, engaged in movements. Very, very few. So there's a whole lot of doors that we can rush into, right? There's a lot of people who we have yet to reach. And that old model of the quick phone call, the quick door knock, the et cetera, hasn't reached those folks, right? They close the door. So the idea of deep canvassing really comes out of some work that's being done in California to change attitudes, a bias against trans people. And what they're doing is they're trying to figure out, can we take folks who are biased against trans people, who have fears of trans people, and have a long conversation with them, not a short conversation, not skip their door because they say, oh, I don't know, I don't want trans people in the bathroom, so you keep moving. But you sit down and you have a very long conversation, 30 minutes, 40 minutes. And the research and data coming out of this is quite interesting. You may have heard there was a thing on NPR last year where they talked about this research and it was sort of debunked. They had falsified the stuff. There was data falsified. Well, those researchers, the researcher who had falsified the data left the team, and they went back and they said, let's do it again and figure out what went wrong. And now they're actually finding really interesting things about changing attitudes by having long-term conversations and engagements. And I think this is, part of the future of organizing, which is not just mobilizing the people who are already with you, or not just, IDing the people who lean your way, but really having honest, difficult conversations with people who may be against you initially, or you think you're against each other, but when you scratch the surface, you have more in common. What else is new? One of the old sacred cows of organizing was you had to fight winnable fights. You had to have wins. And one of the classic community organizing campaigns was for stop signs, right? You fight for a stop sign because it gives people a sense of their power. You win a small victory, people say, wow, my kids were afraid to cross the street. Now we have a stop sign. I realize that working together, we have more power than being apart. The problem is, from the labor movement to the community organizing movement, all these civil rights movement, we were winning small victories and losing big battles. And you losing this bigger war. Like you look around and things got worse and worse for communities, even though you were winning small battles. And I think what's happening now is people are revisiting this issue and saying, yes, we have to win those small victories, but we also have to have big visionary demands that don't just stay within what's possible, but shift what's possible, right? $15 minimum wage seemed like it was totally impossible just a few years ago. And yet it set a bar, it planted a flag that changed the whole conversation about what was possible and what would work in our economy. I think that there are other examples, single-payer healthcare, which is something which is a big, bold, visionary shift in the way healthcare works. and yet I think that it's demonstrated that there's huge public support for it. The question is, how do we set that support on fire? How do we turn that into something that becomes more than a vision and really becomes a movement? And that takes me to a pair of quotes. The first is one you know from Frederick Douglass. And if you think about big, visionary, impossible demands, think about ending slavery in this country. You know, this country, the Constitution institutionalizes slavery. The economy was based on slavery, not just in the South, but in the North. It was a generationally accepted practice. So the idea that you would not just tweak or reform slavery, but you would eliminate slavery was a radical idea. And people fought about that idea in the movement, in the abolitionist movement, in the Congress, etc. So Frederick Douglass says, power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did and it never will, right? And it's clear, power doesn't give up its power without a fight, right? People with money and wealth don't just give that up. Oops. I'm missing a slide here. Oh, so this, here, that's the other quote. Sorry, it's out of order. So then you pair that quote with this observation, which says, Occupy Wall Street demanded everything and nothing at the same time. Right? So one of the critiques of Occupy Wall Street that many people had was, where are the demands? How do you win power? How do you change things if there are no demands? And what Castell says is, yeah, they didn't make specific demands, but they were also saying, we want everything, right? We want to change the whole thing. So my question to you all is sort of, how do we thread that? The thing is, power concedes nothing without a demand, and yet, you know, we want everything, right? We want to change. We don't want to just get scraps. We want to have a total shift in the way things work. And I think that leads to, you know, this question, the battle of ideas. So more and more, I think organizers around the country are saying, yes, we want to win concrete demands, changes to policies and practices that have direct impact on people's lives. That's the whole point. And yet, at the same time, we want to engage in the public debate. We want to change the narrative. We want to shift the framework that determines what's possible to win. And I think that is really the key. So I'm going to end, because my time is up, I think, by saying that, end with a quote from Malcolm X. The future belongs to those who prepare for it today. And that is really why we're here, right? How do we prepare ourselves politically, but also technically, in order to have these struggles, to organize in a new way going forward? Our challenge is to meet people where they're at and then to take them somewhere different in order to improve their own conditions and change this world. It's a big task, but I think we're up to it, and I'm really excited to meet all of you and hear what you're up to and see what you do next. So thank you. And I don't know, is Charles Lenchner in the hall? Well, while we're waiting for Charles to take us to the next phase here, maybe there's some questions or from people have thoughts, questions? And if someone can get Charles, because it's time to transition to the other workshops.
Charles?
Sure, go ahead.
For someone who may be middle-aged without ever even hearing of organizing,
Sure.
What's the one big piece of advice you give?
I think the main thing is that you can start small. You know, one of the great things I learned working at a community organization, Providence, Rhode Island, Direct Action for Rights and Equality, was that you don't need a massive organization, you don't need a big infrastructure, you don't need a 501c3 legal status or an email list. You can organize your building, you can organize your neighbors. It's really about relationships and engaging people together to fight for something. And I think that's key. I think a lot of times today, there's this focus on, okay, we're going to organize, so we got to get a 501c3, and then we're going to get a board, and then we're going to get all this technology, and then we're going to have a staff. And it's like, no, start, do something, have a fight, get people in motion, and if you need that other stuff, then you can get it later. All right, Charles.
Big hand, thank you so much. That was great. It's on. Allegedly, it's on. So just a quick announcement. We have some hashtags in use today. One of them is org20, not org 2.0. On Twitter, you can't have a hashtag with a period in the middle. We're also using Murphy Talks, which we use for all of the events here at the Murphy Institute. And there are many wonderful events here year-round. Make sure that you sign up to the Murphy email list when that's passed around. For the next 2 sessions, you are going to be distributed throughout the 18th and 19th floor. Please be aware that if the room is full, if there's nowhere to sit on a chair, you probably shouldn't go inside or go to another room and bring in more chairs because of the fire code and the possibility that we'll be shut down because of overcrowded rooms. Another thing is, has everyone been able to see the